Everyone assumes Paul Atreides lies because he wants power, control, loyalty, or worship. But that's the most comforting misunderstanding Dune allows us to have. Paul lies because telling the truth would destroy everything instantly. From the moment he sees the full shape of the future, Paul realizes that honesty is no longer a moral option. It's a weapon that would collapse the system he is forced to maintain. The truth is not liberating in Dune, it is destabilizing. Because the future only works if people believe it is inevitable. Paul cannot tell the Freeman that the Jihad will spiral beyond his control, because doubt would not stop the war. It would fragment it, turning contained fanaticism into chaos without limits. He cannot tell the Empire that his rule is temporary or fragile, because power that admits weakness invites immediate violence. He cannot tell his closest allies that there is no good ending, because hope is the last thing preventing total collapse. Paul's lies are not about hiding ambition. They are about preserving coherence in a universe that no longer knows how to function without a central myth. Every sentence he chooses carefully, every silence is deliberate, every truth he withholds is calculated against futures where honesty creates outcomes far worse than deception. The terrifying part is that Paul is aware of how this corrodes him, because each lie pushes him further away from being human and closer to being a mechanism. He becomes fluent in half-truths, symbolic language, prophecy shaped just enough to guide belief without exposing the full horror behind it. This is how religion survives in Dune, not through revelation, but through controlled ignorance. Paul understands that once people see the entire picture, they will either surrender completely or burn everything down trying to escape it. So he lies to keep the future narrow, predictable, survivable. The irony is brutal. The more Paul knows, the less he is allowed to say, because knowledge without restraint is the fastest path to annihilation. Over time, the lie becomes structural, not something Paul does, but something the universe requires from him. Truth turns into a destabilizing force, and deception becomes a form of maintenance. Paul is no longer choosing between honesty and dishonesty. He is choosing between different scales of disaster. This is why he cannot confess, cannot explain, cannot step outside the role people project onto him. Because the moment the myth cracks, belief splinters. And splintered belief is far more violent than unified fanaticism. Dune quietly suggests that the most dangerous thing a god could do is tell the truth, because gods exist to absorb uncertainty, not expose it. And Paul knows that if the people ever realize how fragile the future really is, how many compromises it rests on, how much blood is being balanced against worse blood, the structure would collapse overnight, leaving only uncontrollable rage in its place. So Paul lies, not to protect himself, but to protect a future that cannot survive being fully understood. And that raises an uncomfortable question that Dune never answers directly. Whether a world that requires constant deception to exist deserves to be preserved at all, or whether the lie itself is the final proof that the system was already broken long before Paul ever spoke his first prophecy. What makes Paul's lies so effective is that they are never simple falsehoods. They are carefully filtered truths designed to keep belief intact without letting it spiral out of control. Paul doesn't invent a different future. He withholds parts of the real one, because the full vision would paralyze anyone who tried to live inside it. He understands that most people don't want freedom of choice. They want reassurance that their suffering fits into a larger design, and the moment that design looks uncertain, faith mutates into desperation. Paul lies to the Freeman by allowing them to believe the Jihad is sacred and purposeful, while knowing it is a chain reaction. You can only slow, not stop. He lies to his enemies by projecting absolute confidence, while privately navigating futures where his authority collapses in seconds if doubt leaks through. He even lies to himself by pretending that control is still possible, that precision can replace morality, that calculation can stand in for innocence. Over time, the lie stops feeling like an action and starts feeling like gravity, something that pulls every decision into alignment whether Paul wants it or not. This is where Dune becomes deeply unsettling, because the lies are not exposed as corruption. They are framed as necessity. Paul's silence prevents worse massacres. His ambiguity keeps entire systems from imploding. His refusal to clarify protects billions who would otherwise rush blindly into disaster. And yet, each successful lie reinforces the same system that demands the next one, creating a feedback loop where truth becomes increasingly dangerous and deception increasingly mandatory. Paul realizes that if he ever spoke plainly, if he ever described the future without symbolism or prophecy, people would not calmly accept it. They would try to break it, and in doing so create futures far worse than the ones he is trying to avoid. The lie becomes a form of containment, keeping humanity from seeing how little control it actually has. And the deeper Paul goes, the more he understands that the universe is no longer testing his honesty. It is testing how much of himself he is willing to erase to keep the illusion alive. The most dangerous thing about Paul's lies is that they slowly reshape what truth even means in the universe around him. People stop asking whether something is right or wrong and start asking whether it aligns with what Paul has not denied. Silence becomes confirmation, absence of correction becomes approval, and prophecy replaces accountability. Paul watches this happen and understands that every lie he tells removes another layer of moral resistance from the world. Violence no longer needs justification, only alignment. At that point, the jihad is no longer driven by belief in Paul, but by belief in inevitability, and inevitability is immune to argument. Paul cannot correct this without unraveling everything, because the moment he admits uncertainty, the entire structure built on his perceived certainty collapses. He becomes aware that the lie has evolved beyond communication and turned into architecture, shaping laws, rituals, hierarchies, and wars without requiring his direct involvement. Even attempts at mercy are filtered through myth, interpreted not as compassion, but as divine strategy. Paul begins to see that honesty would not humanize him in the eyes of the people. It would terrify them, because a God who admits fear invites panic, not empathy. So he continues lying, not loudly, not dramatically, but through omission, tone, symbolism, and controlled revelation. The lie becomes invisible, woven so deeply into reality that exposing it would feel like tearing the universe itself apart. And somewhere in that silence, Paul senses that the greatest danger is no longer what people believe, but what they have stopped questioning entirely, because once questioning disappears, belief no longer needs truth to survive. At the end, Paul understands that the lie is no longer something he uses, it is something that uses him. The universe has adjusted itself around his silence so completely that telling the truth would now be an act of violence on a scale he cannot accept. If he spoke honestly, faith would shatter into factions, factions into wars, and wars into futures even he cannot fully contain. Paul sees that the greatest tragedy is not that people are being deceived, but that they have outsourced their responsibility so thoroughly that truth itself has become a threat. The lie keeps civilization functioning, but it also guarantees that it will never grow beyond this moment, never mature, never learn to live without a God absorbing its fear. Paul remains silent because silence keeps the system stable, but stability comes at the cost of honesty, freedom, and eventually meaning itself. And this is the final tension Dune leaves unresolved, whether Paul is committing the ultimate betrayal by lying to everyone, or whether telling the truth would be the cruelest act imaginable. Because if the future only survives as long as it is misunderstood, then the real question is not why Paul must keep lying to everyone, but what kind of civilization collapses the moment it is forced to face the truth, and whether that collapse is something Paul is preventing, or something he is only delaying.